the low carbohydrate diet is perhaps the most effective diet, according to these experts, for managing or even reversing your type 2 diabetes, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that.
If you remember the 80s and 90s, there's this huge movement against fat that, all fat is bad for you. It caused heart disease and all this sort of stuff, much of which has sort of been, overturned at this point. It's not the total number of calories that's important. It's what your body does with those calories, and that depends on hormones.
That's fairly simple, standard advice that almost anybody can follow.
If you give yourself a little boost in terms of the mental abilities, as you get with fasting, that could be the difference between being like Facebook and being like MySpace.
You don't want your cells to grow when there's no food, right? It's just natural. The reason carbohydrates are very problematic is that they tend to be processed.
Green tea might be especially useful for weight loss for a number of different reasons.
It's not just the amount that you eat or what it is that you eat, it's how often you eat it. You want to avoid sugar because sugar, the way that we process fructose is sort of particularly bad, and that's why sugar is particularly fattening.
Need motivation?
What's the top 10 with Believe Nation?
Top 10, I got a top 10. Got my motivation high for my top 10. Gotta learn from the wise women and men. All my life, like 9 and 9. For my top 10, top 10, 9 and 9. This one's for my top 10.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Dr. Jason Fung, and my take on his top 10 rules for success. Enjoy. Okay, let's kick it off with rule number 1, reverse diabetes.
In 2019, the American Diabetes Association published a consensus report on nutrition therapy for adults with diabetes. And what this means is that they got all their top scientists together and they hammered out what they considered the best scientific evidence for diet. And this is what they recommended. They recognized that there are a variety of eating patterns are acceptable for the management of diabetes. There's certain principles, that is emphasizing non-starchy vegetables, minimizing added sugars and refined grains, and choosing whole foods. But another key recommendation from these scientists is that reducing the overall carbohydrate intake for individuals with diabetes has the most evidence for controlling type 2 diabetes. In other words, the low carbohydrate diet is perhaps the most effective diet, according to these experts, for managing or even reversing your type 2 diabetes, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. In order to understand how the diet works, you have to understand a little bit about why people develop type 2 diabetes. One of the important things is that type 2 diabetes is actually a reversible dietary disease, and most people won't tell you that. In fact, places like Diabetes Canada say it's a chronic progressive disorder, but most people understand that if you lose weight, then almost always that type 2 diabetes gets better or even goes away. The disease of type 2 diabetes is very simple to understand. Essentially, there's simply too much sugar in your body. That is both glucose, which is found in starchy foods. Starches are actually chains of glucose, and also fructose, which is found in simple sugars like table sugar or fruit. So when your body has too much of this sugar, both glucose and fructose, and it can't store any more of it, then it's going to spill out into the blood. And when your blood glucose starts to rise, that's when your doctor makes the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. It's simply an overflow problem. Therefore, the rational strategy, if you have too much sugar in your body, is to reduce the amount of sugar going into your body. Therefore, a low carbohydrate diet makes a lot of sense because you're switching from eating foods that contain a lot of sugars, which are glucose and sometimes fructose, to eating more foods that contain protein and fat. And while these have calories and other nutrients, they don't have a lot of glucose. And the problem is too much glucose. So that's how a low carbohydrate diet can be very effective in reducing type 2 diabetes or even reversing it.
Rule number 2, reduce your risk of cancer.
What are the main causes of cancer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that we've always been trying to deal with. And sometimes some people say, well, we don't know what causes cancer. That's sort of a cop-out because we actually do know a lot about what causes cancer. And these are things that cause cancer are called carcinogens. And the World Health Organization maintains a huge list of these carcinogens. But if you want to break it down into what causes cancer in most people, you can look at the sort of, a couple of studies have looked at the sort of percentage contribution of these carcinogens to cancer. And the biggest one, of course, is tobacco smoke. So that's sort of by far and away the biggest contributor to cancer at around 35%. And these estimates were from 2015. So it was higher before when more people are smoking, but as a contributor to a cancer, it's the biggest. Interestingly, the second biggest and almost as big is actually our diet. So it's a huge, huge part of what contributes to cancer in general, and far outstrips. So those two are way above any other causes of cancer. So when you worry about things such as radiation or, chemicals, sunscreens and pesticides and stuff like that, they do cause cancer, but the contribution in a whole population is very small. So what's interesting about diet is that we know this from our studies, but what part of the diet actually contributes to cancer? And that's where things sort of bogged down a lot. So initially in the 70s, people talked about fiber. So people thought about, oh, hey, well, maybe if you eat a lot of fiber, what you're going to do is have a lot of big bowel movements, and that's going to clean out your bowel and you're not going to get cancer. Turns out that wasn't true. Then the next thought was, hey, maybe it's dietary fat. So if you remember the 80s and 90s, there's this huge movement against fat that, all fat is bad for you. It caused heart disease and all this sort of stuff, much of which has sort of been, overturned at this point. But there's this thought, maybe it causes cancer too. Turns out that wasn't true either. Then people talked about vitamins. So maybe cancer is like a vitamin deficiency. So we did many, many studies, millions of dollars, decades of research, where we would randomize people to, say, one group that took a certain vitamin and one group that didn't, and see if there's any difference in cancer. So we tested vitamin A, didn't work. Vitamin B didn't work. Folic acid didn't work. Vitamin C didn't work. Vitamin D didn't work. Vitamin E didn't work. Selenium didn't work. Omega-3 fatty acids didn't work. So all of those supplements didn't actually make any difference to the incidence of cancer. So we were sort of stuck at that point in the mid 2000s saying, oh, we know it's the diet, but what part of the diet? And that's when it became sort of more and more clear that this cancer is actually an obesity-related disease. So what happened, of course, is that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, people didn't really think about it, but then we had this obesity epidemic, so it became a bigger and bigger problem. So obesity in 2003, when they started to look at the studies, that was the first really definitive studies that said, hey, obesity is actually a huge risk factor, as well as type 2 diabetes. And both of those conditions will actually increase your risk of certain types of cancer a lot. So it really depends on what type of cancer you're talking. Like if you're talking lung cancer, obesity plays almost no role in it, right? That's smoking. Or if you have asbestos, which causes mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the lining of the lung, again, obesity plays no role. But things like breast cancer and colorectal cancer, which are sort of really important cancers, they actually are obesity-related cancers. So that was the sort of big link. And to this, at this point, the World Health Organization considers 13 different types of cancer as obesity-related cancers, which is huge because from 2003, we didn't even know. Like when I went to medical school, nobody thought obesity caused cancer.
Really?
It's almost as big as smoking. It's a huge, huge thing. So therefore, if you know that, that's super powerful, because if you can maintain a normal weight, you're going to reduce, just like stopping smoking, right? You're going to reduce your risk of these types of cancer.
Rule number 3, stop counting calories.
The question of weight loss is one that has really become more and more important as we've had more and more obesity. So over the years, we've seen more people with obesity, which has led to more people with type 2 diabetes, which has led them to get kidney disease, which is where I kind of come in because I'm a kidney specialist. So it's become a bigger and bigger part of the practice. And it sort of dawned on me that eventually got through my thick skull that really weight loss is sort of really critical to keeping people healthy, because it's sort of obvious. Like it leads to type 2 diabetes, which is a huge risk factor, not only for kidney disease, but for heart attacks and strokes and cancer. And it's a leading cause of blindness and amputations and diabetic infections and all kinds of bad things. So almost like, 50% of what I do is related to type 2 diabetes. And the point was that if you can reverse your type 2 diabetes, then you're not going to get these diabetic complications. And in order to do that, you need to lose weight, which is why I became very interested about 8 years ago in the question of how to lose weight. And I didn't know much about it at the time, but people were always, what I had learned in medical school was all about sort of calories in, calories out sort of thing. But the more I looked into it, one, it's a very, very unsuccessful way to lose weight. Counting calories simply does not work at all. And people will say, oh, but it does. Well, if you look at the scientific studies, it doesn't. Every single study that's looked at sort of, say, trying to restrict calories leads to, at best, a couple of pounds of weight loss over like 8 years. It's not the number of calories, it's what your body does with those calories. Because if you take 100 calories, if you eat a cookie, for example, and you take 100 calories, your body has a decision to make. Do I store that as body fat, or do I burn it for energy and, say, increase body heat generation, for example? And that's the basal metabolic rate. That's the number of calories that your body uses in a day. So which your body does. So for that same 100 calories, you can either become fatter or you can have a bit more energy during the day. And which one your body does really depends on the hormones that are associated with the foods that you're eating. And that's the real key, because if you simply cut calories, and this is the way that I was taught and everybody was taught, you simply cut the fat, eat less fat, because fat is very dense in calories. You get less calories, and therefore your body is going to lose body fat. But that's not necessarily true. If you eat 500 calories less, your body could simply decide to burn 500 calories less, and you won't lose any body fat. And it's not a matter of thermodynamics, because that whole idea that it's just about thermodynamics assumes that your basal metabolic rate remains absolutely rock stable. That is, if you're using 2,000 calories a day today, you go on a diet, you'll still use 2,000 calories a day, but you won't. We've known that for at least 100 years of basic research, that your body will actually use fewer calories. So cutting 500 calories a day, which has been the standard device, is very unsuccessful, because if you don't change the hormonal system in your body, and different foods contain different hormonal instructions, your body could simply decide to burn 500 less and you will not lose body fat. So it's simply false to say if you cut 500 calories a day down, you'll lose a pound of body fat a week. It's actually not true in any way, shape, or form. Just like if you say, well, if you make an extra $100, this week, that you'll be $100 richer. You might or might not be. If you make $100 more and you spend $100 by going out, you're not richer. Same thing with your body. You take 500 calories less that day, but you burn 500 less because your metabolic rate goes down, you're not losing body fat. And that's the whole point. So it's not the total number of calories that's important. It's what your body does with those calories, and that depends on hormones. And in fact, everything in our body runs on hormones. Those are the instructions that we give to our body as to what to do. So everything your body does or doesn't do depends on hormones. Those are the sort of mediators.
Rule number 4, go easy on carbohydrates.
Recently, Dr. David and Jen Unwin in the United Kingdom published a very interesting study of how they use low carbohydrate diets in their practice in the UK to reverse type 2 diabetes. Drs. Unwin are brilliant clinical innovators who have been honored by their society there, and what they did was they noted that in their practice from 1987 to 2018, there was an 8-fold increase in the prevalence of type 2 diabetes. So since 2013, they started to offer low carbohydrate diets as an alternative to using medications. And not everybody took this advice. They found that 27% of those people took the advice. In their practice, they gave people a very simple to understand sheet with dietary advice for low carbohydrate intake, as well as a simple infographic, and simply monitored them over time. The results when they analyzed them were nothing short of stunning. Over the time that the people took this low carbohydrate diet, they lost an average of 8.3 kilograms, which is more than 18 pounds. They were able to reduce the overall medication use, and a stunning 46% of type 2 diabetics actually reversed their disease so that they were no longer considered diabetic. In pre-diabetes, the results were even better. 93% of people who use this low carbohydrate diet advice actually became non-diabetic. They were able to reverse their type 2 diabetes. They were able to reverse their pre-diabetes. Remember that if you are on medication, please be sure to check with your doctor first and also follow up during this process. This is the simple one-page sheet that patients were provided that told them what kind of diet to follow. Very simple rules. First of all, sugar, just cut it out altogether. The other thing is with starchy carbohydrates, remember that when they get broken down, they're often broken down into glucose, which is a type of sugar. So things like bread, rice, potatoes, try to reduce them significantly. The other green vegetables are all fine. You should eat as much as you want. Turn the white stuff into the green stuff so that you get a nice big dinner still. Fruit is a little bit trickier because some fruits tend to be very sweet and therefore have a lot of sugar in them. Others, like berries, tend to be much better and you can be a little bit more relaxed with those. Eat lots of healthy protein, so things like meat, eggs, fish, oily fish, full-fat yogurt is good breakfasty notes as well. And fats in moderation are fine. Make sure you stick to natural fats. Things like olive oil, butter, coconut oil are fats that are found in nature. They're unprocessed. Beware of low-fat foods. They can often have a lot of sugars and sweeteners, and cheese only in moderation because it can be very easy to overeat them. The other thing is to make sure you avoid snacks because they can be very habit forming and it's very easy to eat them without thinking and therefore overeat them too much. In essence, you're eating lots of vegetables with proteins and healthy fats, and that leaves you feeling properly full in a way that lasts, and therefore you do not need to snack all the time. And finally, about sweeteners, just cut them out. They trick your brain into thinking that you're hungry and make it even harder to lose weight. That's fairly simple, standard advice that almost anybody can follow. They also give a infographic just demonstrating how much equivalent sugars are in certain foods, just to drive home how much sugar can be contained and why it needs to be avoided, especially very starchy foods. And that's really all there is to it. If you can switch over to cutting down the carbohydrates, emphasizing the green vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, proteins, and healthy fats, then you stand a good chance of reversing type 2 diabetes. Again, remembering that type 2 diabetes is not that hard to understand. It's like a rain barrel. If you are filling it up with too much water, it's going to spill over, just like the sugar is going to spill over into our body. The best thing is not to get lots of mops and clean it up all the time. The best thing is to turn off the tap. And when you do that, you can stop filling up the body with sugar, and therefore the blood sugar falls, and then you stand a good chance of reversing type 2 diabetes.
Also, if you want to have more self-confidence and self-belief, I've designed a special free training to help you do it. The science says it can take up to 254 days of consecutive action to build a new habit. And I want that for you. I want you to build the habit of self-belief. So what I'm going to do is email you every day for 254 days a link to an unlisted video that will shift your belief forward. To get on it for free, the link to join is in the description below.
You were up and dressed and ready to go before your parents were up. You know why? Because you knew something unexpected was going to happen. That's how we should live our lives. Waking up with the understanding to expect the unexpected.
Today, what creates marketing is when you don't just market, but you add value to people.
If you're going to speak effectively, you have to know way more than you're talking about.
Rule number 5, boost your mental ability.
And through history, you've heard this. So Pythagoras, the ancient Greek mathematician, he required his students to fast before coming to class because he said if you ate, you're like too stupid to figure out all this mathematics. And there's another great story in this book is a biography called Unbroken. It was a memoir of this fellow who got captured in World War II. He was a fighter. He was a bomber pilot, so he got caught, put in the Japanese prisoner of war camps. So there they were literally starving. Like there's really nothing to eat. And what was interesting is that he's looking around, and the guy, Louis Zamperini, he says, you know, he sees people doing all these incredible mental things. He says, there's this one guy, he learned Norwegian in a single week. Another guy is reading books entirely from memory. And he goes, and there was this line in this biography, he goes, that's the incredible mental clarity of starvation. I thought, wow, those people who are literally starving themselves, like they're starving because there's no food to eat, not fasting. Remember, fasting is voluntary. It's under your control. But they were routinely seeing these things that were just incredible. And that's why fasting has actually taken off in Silicon Valley. Like if you look at the hotbed, Silicon Valley is a huge hotbed. You know why? Because there's all these computer geniuses out there, right? They're building Apple and they're, you know, high tech stuff, like really difficult stuff. And they know, they're smart enough to understand that if you give yourself a little boost in terms of the mental abilities, as you get with fasting, that could be the difference between being like Facebook and being like MySpace, right? Because it's so competitive out there. You want to give yourself every advantage. So fasting is going crazy out there. You know, the CEO of Evernote and all these other people, they're doing fasting because it could mean literally millions of dollars in their pocket. If they, you know, it's like steroids for the brain, right? So they're doing it, and while everybody else is, oh, you're going to get brain fatigue. It's like, no, your brain's going to work just fine. Remember, your body has the ability, you know, we've evolved this ability to use that fat that we carry. So another thing is that, you know, you mentioned that people get amenorrhea if your body weight's too low. Well, if your body weight is too low, you shouldn't be fasting anyway. right? That makes no sense. So it's the same with anorexia. If you have anorexia nervosa, then no, you shouldn't be fasting. It's all about where you apply it, right? So you're not going to use fasting in a 16-year-old girl who weighs 60 pounds. But you are going to use fasting in a 60-year-old man who weighs 350 pounds and has type 2 diabetes.
Rule number 6, stop activating growth.
The development of this cancer, it will grow or not grow depending on growth signals. So our body has certain nutrient sensors. So nutrient sensors tells our body when food is available. So when you eat, certain hormones like insulin and mTOR will go up. And that tells our body that food is available, we should grow, right? Because you don't want your cells to grow when there's no food, right? It's just natural. Mm-hmm. If there's no food, you got to get rid of some of those extraneous cells. So if you're eating all the time and you're always activating these nutrient sensors, you're actually telling your body, grow, 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 grow. So if you eat 6-8 times a day, you're telling your body, your cells in your body, grow, 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 grow. If you eat fewer times, like 3 times a day, or you do intermittent fasting, if you don't eat at all, what you're going to do is shut down those growth signals, and this cancer will have a more difficult time to grow. So if you grow breast cancer cells in the lab, for example, you can't do it without insulin. It will actually wither up and die. So therefore, if you know that, then you can say, well, and that's one of the secrets of
insulin comes from eating any food, or is this only sugar?
It's carbohydrates and protein. So, but the nutrient sensors come from different foods. So different foods will activate different nutrient sensors. But the point is that if you don't eat, like fasting, for example, one is you're going to lower your insulin levels, which will lower the overall growth signaling in our body, which is a good thing for adults. And adults' growth is not good. Generally, you stay the same size. You don't want to be growing too much because the growth, a high growth environment, of course, lets the cancer sort of grow out of control. And that was the secret to why vitamins, for example, was not a good thing, because it's basically growth. It supports growth of cells. And what they found in a lot of studies was when they gave people these vitamin supplements, they actually got more cancer. They didn't get less cancer, they got more cancer. So in fact, it's just like if you spread fertilizer on an empty field, you want the grass to grow, but what grows are a bunch of weeds because you've put down all this growth signaling stuff. So therefore, all you get is the weeds.
Rule number 7, avoid processed foods.
If you think about eating steak, for example, you can eat a certain amount of steak. And then at some point, you can't really just keep eating. You will actually just get nauseous, as we've all done at the buffet when we've eaten too much. You can't just say, that looks good, I'm just going to have another pork chop. It's really hard to do that because those satiety hormones are very powerful. The reason carbohydrates are very problematic is that they tend to be processed. So processing removes a lot of these satiety signals. So even if you've eaten a huge buffet and somebody says, hey, do you want a few sips of my soda? You'd say, sure, no problem, because they don't activate your satiety mechanisms. And same for like a cookie. You could easily eat a cookie after you're full from dinner, where you would not eat another pound of steak. So it's a bit more complex because there's multiple interacting hormonal systems that regulate how we respond. Protein doesn't seem to be nearly as bad, even though it has a lot of insulin effect. It has probably a lot of these other hormonal effects that are just as important and really stop us from eating. Just like if you were to eat steak and eggs in the morning, a lot of fat, a lot of protein, it tends to keep you more full than if you were to eat white bread and jam. You eat that, and then at 10:30, you're looking for a low-fat muffin, for example. And this is one of the things which I always say is, like, when you're thinking about weight gain, weight loss, you really have to think about hormones, because it's really a hormonal imbalance, not a caloric imbalance, because the calories on all these foods can actually be exactly the same. And that's why not all carbohydrates are bad for you. Like clearly there have been many societies that have lived primarily on carbohydrates. Yet if you measure the insulin response, they're actually quite good. So something like they did a study in Catawba, for example, which is a South Pacific island, and they measured their diet, and it was about 70% carbohydrates, but natural carbohydrates, and they weren't eating all the time. Then when they measured their insulin level was below the 5th percentile of a reference sort of Swedish population. So that means that even though they're eating a lot of carbohydrates, their insulin levels are still very low. So there's lots of things, not only the foods that you eat, but also the frequency with you eat them plays a really important role, and the amount of processing that goes into it. And you can see that effect in something like the glycemic index, where when you eat white bread, things just spike way up. But if you were to eat beans, which is all carbohydrate, the glycemic index is much lower. And most natural foods are like that. You don't see that huge spike that you get. So the processing of the carbohydrates makes it especially problematic, because it is a fuel source for our body that our body is able to use very easily.
Rule number 8, hydrate.
Remember, when you're fasting, you're not eating, but you can still drink water. A classic fast is water only. And water is great. A lot of people do very well with that. It makes it a lot easier if you're staying hydrated, because some of the hunger tends to go down. But there's a few other things that you can drink other than water that might be very helpful to include. The first one I would like to talk about is green tea. Green tea might be especially useful for weight loss for a number of different reasons. And what's the difference? Well, green tea is brewed from the unfermented tea leaves, and these contain certain antioxidants, most important of which are called catechins, also called ECGC is the specific one. And the reason that they're so beneficial is that they may have a role in suppressing hunger, but also increasing the metabolic rate. And those two things are going to make it easier to lose weight and to fast. And some of the studies that have been done in the scientific literature really bear this out. We can look at a certain meta-analysis, which are studies which group other studies together to look at the overall effect. And you can see when they look at this that drinking green tea seems to lead to an extra 1.5 to 2 kilograms of weight loss. Well, that's a real benefit, and green tea is cheap, it's available, it's been used for thousands of years, and it's also very tasty, so there's no reason not to use it. The other thing that green tea tends to do is increase the metabolic rate, and this may be due to not only the catechins, but also some of the caffeine that's in green tea may increase the sympathetic nervous system and lead your body to use more calories. So in this meta-analysis, what they find is that perhaps about 300 to 400 extra calories per day is used extra when you're taking this green tea. So again, the caffeine and the catechins will tend to make your body sort of a little bit more active, and therefore it needs more energy, and therefore it burns more calories. The green tea, through these various mechanisms, may increase the amount of fat oxidation as well as carbohydrate oxidation, which means that your body is using up some of the glucose and using up some of the fat. Remember that the catechins are thought to be the main mechanism through which this happens. If you drink regular hot brewed green tea, you're going to get a good amount of catechins, more than any other type of tea or any other type of beverage, but we can do even better than that. If you use a special cold brew, then you can actually extract more of the catechins, because just like when you use cold brew coffee, you can get more of the flavor. When you use the cold brew for green tea, you can also get more of the catechins out, because the heat of the water can sometimes destroy them. But it's not just green tea. If you don't like green tea, that's fine. You can also drink black teas and oolong teas. So the difference between black teas and green teas is that the black teas are fermented. Oolong is a sort of semi-fermentation. So you don't get as many of the catechins, but these catechins actually get changed into other antioxidants called theaflavins, and they may also have some of the same benefits, such as this study where it showed that it also increased the amount of energy expenditure. The other beverages to stay hydrated and also help you with the fasting might be something such as coffee. Now, coffee, of course, can be taken black, but be careful about what you add to it. If you're just adding a small amount of cream, that's likely okay, but adding too much sweeteners or sugar or other dairy products is going to add calories and work against you for weight loss. It's the same for bone broth. So bone broth is another beverage that can be very effective to get you through your fasting day. However, just remember that it does have calories, it does have some protein and so on. But again, if it allows you to go longer, easier, it might be worth it in the end. So all of these fasting variations are very useful. The other thing to consider is also herbal teas. So these are not true teas because they don't contain tea leaves, but things like mint, for example, can be very calming. Chamomile, for example, at nighttime is very soothing. Lemon, that kind of thing.
Rule number 9, avoid eating frequently.
It's not just the amount that you eat or what it is that you eat, it's how often you eat it. So if you're eating now 6-8 times a day, well, that's a lot worse if you ate once a day, right? That's just basic math. Like you can't get around that. And the problem is, of course, that if you look at how people eat today compared to sort of 1970, it's very different. So in 1970, people ate 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. No snacks. Nobody ate snacks back then.
Now it's a snack culture, like snacking all day.
Exactly. And people say it's good for you. People say, oh, you should eat multiple times in the day, 6 times a day. It's good for you. But nobody in the history of humanity has done that before because we had work to do, right? It's not like your great grandparents, working in the factory, they're taking off every 2 hours to make themselves a little, ham sandwich or something, right? It was like, there's work to do. You eat when you have time. So, in the 70s, it's funny because I always say you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that was it. If you wanted an after-school snack, your mom said, no, you're going to ruin your dinner. And if you wanted a bedtime snack, she would have said, no, you should have ate more at dinner, right? And
right, you should have finished your meal.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the point. And nobody ate not a lot of desserts and all that. Nowadays, of course, when you look at the studies, people are eating 5-6 times a day. You even look at schools. It's like, they're going to have breakfast. Then they're going to have a mid-morning snack. Then they're going to have lunch. Then they're going to have an after-school snack. Then they're going to eat dinner. And then if they play soccer, in between the halves of soccer, parents think that you need to feed them like cookies. It's like, okay, well, I played soccer growing up and nobody chased me around with a bunch of cookies. Right. We had a great time, right?
Exactly.
You didn't need it, right? But that's 6 times a day, every single day. And it's ingrained into us. A few years ago when my son was, going on a trip or something, the school said, well, you should pack him 2 snacks. I'm like, why? Why would you want to give him a bunch of snacks? Like, they're not good for you.
And rule number 10, the last one before a very special bonus clip, is lower your insulin levels.
You want to avoid sugar because sugar, the way that we process fructose is sort of particularly bad. And that's why sugar is particularly fattening, really. And that's true if you're a bear, you're eating a lot of ripe berries and stuff because you're trying to gain fat. And it's also true, as anybody knows, if you're eating a lot of cookies and brownies, you're probably going to gain weight. The other thing is you can't eat all the time because, again, it's a cycle between feeding and fasting. That's what we're supposed to do. If you don't give your body time to burn off all those calories that it's taken in, which means the fasting period, you're going to overall gain weight. It's like a one-way valve. If you go in but don't come out, eventually everything just gets bigger. Same thing. That energy cannot come out if your insulin levels are high. That's just the way it's designed. And it's sort of like, if you see a tanker, those tanker trucks on the side of the road, sometimes you think, oh, they'll never run out of fuel because they have all this fuel. But they do run out of fuel, of course, because you can't access that fuel that's in that big container. Same thing with your body fat, right? It's locked away. If you do not lower your insulin levels, you will never have access to those stores of energy.
Now I've got a special bonus clip that I think you're gonna enjoy, but before that, it's time for the question of the day. I wanna know, what was your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week? When you just get inspired, you watch a video, you get motivated, amazing. The science says you have a 35% chance of actually doing something, actually following through. That, Believe Nation, is not enough. That is not you, not now, not anymore, not today. But when you get inspired and then you create a specific plan of action for what you're gonna do, that number jumps to 91% chance of you following through. And when you commit publicly to others, like leaving a comment in this video, it jumps to 95%. So the question of the day is your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week. Put it down in the comments below, and maybe next week I'll profile you.
Everything in life is always easier when you do it in a group. This is true not just for fasting, but also for diets or quitting alcohol or quitting smoking. Humans are social animals and we need that support. So find the people that are going to support you. That is people you can talk to about how you're having difficulties, people who are going to give you tips, and there's lots of ways to do this. So you can go online. It's easier than ever to go onto various social media platforms and find people who are going to be supportive of intermittent fasting. There's always going to be a lot of dissenting opinion. So if you're not sure if people are going to support you, you might want to keep it quiet because some people will discourage you from fasting because they simply don't understand. Even though it's been used for thousands of years, not everybody is going to be supportive because there's a lot of conflicting opinion out there. Finding that supportive group is sometimes the difference in succeeding and failing.
If you want 10 more amazing rules from Dr. Alan Goldhammer, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Sometimes results are proportional to effort. You want to put the extra effort in, you'll get the extra results. It's not a necessary component for most people to achieve a high degree of health. What's necessary is to have the